Chris DeLeon here of GamKeto. Pardon the weird lighting. We got a little LA sunset action happening over here. But what I want to talk about today is the idea that anyone at any phase of their life who would like to make video games should be able to do so. That is not an unreasonable request in 2017. Now, it used to be that the game industry looked like it was something where you had to be able to risk it all, had to be young, or to make things happen. And we'll talk about how some of that's still going on. But I want to first contextualize this in that I grew up in St. Joseph, Missouri. That's the home of the Pony Express. There's a little mug, some stamps. I picked these up when I was showing the fiance our Pony Express museum going home over the holidays. And the Pony Express was a mail courier in the 1860s in the United States that they would hire young people, literal teenagers. The recruitment flyer literally says, young, skinny, wiry fellows not over 18. They would hire them to deliver mail from St. Joseph, Missouri across the continent to the West Coast before there were United States filling in that territory, which means, and this is a culturally complex and unfortunate part of our history, but that was extremely dangerous because at the time there were native people of the continent who were defending their land and their way of life. And so the wanted flyer literally said willing to risk death daily was a part of the job requirement. Orphans preferred. They didn't want anyone dying they'd have to send a sad letter to their parents. Kind of messed up, but as a little kid growing up in St. Joe Mo, this was sort of idolized. This was sort of like the mythology that we had. And looking up to the game industry and making games, it kind of seemed like that was the experience we're kind of bracing ourselves for. In terms of it's this perfect storm. It's a Venn diagram of tech company culture, which pretty famously the startup scene in Silicon Valley tell us is a gambling game for young people where, they go in there, they risk it all. Some of them go super deep into debt and ruin their credit. Some people make it big, but that's what tech industry looks like. It's those big bets. It's those unicorns, right? Or it's those billion-dollar startups. But on the other hand, it's the arts industry. So unlike at least the tech industry scene is trying to serve some conceivable need of a business or of a customer, it's also an arts industry thing where just like the music industry or just like writing poetry or dance or painting or whatever, like film, it's also just a matter of taste. It's a matter of creative expression. It's a matter that might not be everyone's thing. And it was this overlap of starving artist and a startup scene, tech scene kind of mentality. Like, oh, that's what the game industry has to look like because it's a tech company with creative objectives and creative products. And sure enough, that's how it often used to look. And still today, we see it in the indie scene. You see it in Indie Game, the movie. Here's a recent tweet that, so William Shire, he's a guy, I don't know if y'all know him. My apologies, by the way, William, if I'm mispronouncing your name. We've met a couple times at conferences. I don't remember how he pronounces it. But he was tweeting about how after Manifold Garden, this MC Escher-looking giant puzzle, amazing console game he's developing independently, he's been working on it for years, used to be called Relativity, he says he's going to leave the medium. Not because he doesn't like it, because he finds the reality far too challenging. As he summarizes it, he's been working on this game for 4 years, not paying himself, which isn't sustainable. He's been a solo developer, living on about $20,000 a year of just keeping expenses low. That's mainly food and rent. Not putting any money towards savings throughout his mid-20s. He's had to borrow money. And as he puts it, this was only possible to do because he was 25, no kids, no mortgage, and also made most of the game alone. He doesn't even want to factor in the opportunity costs that even on a very conservative estimate of a junior programmer salary of $50K a year, he would have earned $200,000 keeping a normal day job as a programmer instead of spending $20K a year making his indie game. Does that make sense? And as he points out, when you start to bring on other people, contractors or employees, costs start to skyrocket. See how this sounds a little bit like our Pony Express? Can only possible because he's 25, no kids, no mortgage, so on and so on. And so here's part of why my mission in life is to try to get more people out there who aren't just Pony Express material to be able to make games, to figure out how to make it fit into our lives, that it shouldn't just be for people who in the mid-20s are able to take those chances. You know what? When I was doing my indie game stuff, when I made Topple, which was a co-made along with John Nesky and published by Ngimoco, but like top-ranked App Store game in 2008. When we built that, I was living in a mobile home. I was keeping costs very, 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 very low. So after Topple, when I made Feel For It, the Indicate finalist, before I got involved, obviously, running their workshops, when I made Tumult on iPad, I was living in the cheapest, most affordable historically dangerous part of downtown San Francisco. And those were things that I was able to do because, like William summarized, I was 25, I didn't have kids, yada, yada, yada. Didn't have a mortgage. And at the same time, making games doesn't just have to be like that. Making games is such an enriching experience. It's such an enjoyable activity. It's something that I think everyone should be able to enjoy. In the same way as the only people who get to play soccer shouldn't be people who do it on television because it's healthy and fun to play soccer, or the only people who get to perform music shouldn't be the ones who do it on stage and they sell tickets for concerts and stadiums, because playing music and performing music and singing and playing instruments is a wonderful, enriching part of life. Making video games should be something that's accessible to everybody who wants to do it. Now, in the same way, people who are doing it in their spare time with their spare energy, let's be realistic. It's not going to look like a AAA commercial shelf product. It's not. And if it could, they sure as heck wouldn't be spending $85 million on paying professionals for 6 years full time to build those games. They would have, somebody do it on their weekends for, next to nothing. You can't. That's why those things look different. This is a lot of what my resources and materials and my mission in life, my free video course, these YouTube videos, the podcast message, my Gamketo Club, right? It's what a lot of this is about. It's trying to help it fit into more people's lives at a level at which, if they want to use it as a stepping stone towards doing it either professionally as a contractor, as an independent developer, or in a studio, can be a useful stepping stone. But for so many other people, it doesn't have to be. It can be an end in itself of, you want to make games. Because making games is awesome, and making games is great, and it's a fun outlet, and it tests and challenges your creative abilities and your technical abilities and your social abilities when you start working on teams. And now, speaking of social abilities, part of what makes this possible, and some of my favorite stories to come from Gamketo Club are members where they have a family, they're head of the household, some of them they're paying for a house, they have that mortgage, they're older, they're living the situation that William says can't be done to make games. Now, they're not making their game commercially, they're not betting their house on making the game, but they're making the games that they want to make, and they're able to do that because they have a support structure in place. And it's a lot like, it'll seem like a weird metaphor at first. I think it's more specific than it's going to sound, though. It's a little bit like, anybody could work out at home, right? Anybody can do sit-ups and push-ups. Anybody could lift something heavy, buy a $20 pull-up bar, run around the block. But the reason why people get a gym membership is because they know that when they go to their context and they're surrounded by other people who are working hard at it and taking it seriously and invested in doing it right and there to spot one another and there to encourage and support one another, then they're way more likely to do it. Gamketo Club is like that, but for video game developers. It's like a virtual gym for video game developers. And a lot of the challenges I see, I see it down here in the YouTube comments. I apologize, I don't always get to every single one of those. I see it, people complain about it on Twitter. I see people talk about it when they email me about motivation. They know they're capable of it, but they're just not doing it. Or they're just not making the time consistently enough or whatever. And they blame themselves. They're hard on themselves of, they think it's a problem with themselves, and it's usually not. It's that there's lacking a context. They're lacking the support. They're lacking a little bit of minimal structure around them to make that process more accessible. In the same way that it's easier for someone who's paying a lot of money to be in a university to work on it because they're surrounded by people who are also there specifically to do that thing. In our club, even though it's all online, when people go into our club Slack forum, they know they're surrounded by other people who are really doing it, who are building the games that they want to build. When they go to our online meetings, they're listening to others who they know are in the same kind of battles and trade-offs they are. That it's people who aren't able to be doing this full-time 40 hours a week and are still finding times to do it and finding ways to do it. And it is a lot like a running group or a gym group in that they're able to support each other in that way. Or, another way it feels like it's almost too direct to the metaphor, but like in a gym, right? Part of what happens in a gym is people spot each other. And it's important people can spot each other because here's why, right? So spotting, I'm pretty sure most of you know this. Let's just cover all the bases. I don't know what anyone's background is. Spotting, right, is where you're going to lift slightly more than you're confident you can, because if you get stuck, you don't want that bar crushing you. You want someone else to be able to help you bring it back up. And that's how you're able to push yourself. And what happens in game development, there's two directions that people have to err in favor of if they do not have someone there to spot them and support them. Either they're not challenging themselves, they're going nowhere near their limit, because they're worried if they cross that limit, they're going to get crushed, they're going to get stuck, right? And so that means they can go years of making games and never actually see any real improvement, never really see any real results, because they can't safely challenge themselves. Or the other direction, people will bite off more than they can chew. We see this happen all the time. They get stuck. They got nowhere to turn. They're stuck under that bar. They're crushed. They can't even gauge at their experience level yet how close they are to finishing it or not, or how close they are to solving this puzzle or not, right? I mean, is this something that they should have figured out by now? Is it something that would take a PhD researcher 8 years to try to solve the underlying problem in a way that's not obvious from the surface? And they will basically stall out for years and then quit when their morale takes a dive and they're tired of feeling guilty for themselves. But when you have someone there to spot you, when you have other people, whether it's team members in a club, whether it's myself as the kind of like lead trainer of the group, to help advise out of those situations, it allows people to consistently, every single week, challenge themselves just a little bit, promise something that they're pretty sure they can do on their own, but if they can't, they have a way to turn for help. And that's what allows them to keep stretching and pushing at that limit of what they're currently able to do. And we see that result coming from, like I say, not just people who are exactly 25, no kids, no mortgage, and that kind of situation, or having to make the entire game alone. It's trying to put together a structure that works for more people to make games, because making games is great, and because more people should be able to make games, and it shouldn't just be limited to people who are able to survive going deep into debt or finding an investor. You find ways to fit into your spare time, whether it's through my stuff or somebody else's. There's lots of resources out there today, lots of communities out there today of people can try to help you learn this stuff. I have my approach, other people have their approaches, but it's something that I hope more people out there, we see increasingly year after year, more people making games, not just with the mission to go on and do it professionally, of which there's nothing wrong with, but also plenty of people who just get into it because they just want to make games. Because making games is awesome and a great goal and end in and of itself. So that's it for now. Shouldn't be like the Pony Express in terms of accessibility of who can be participating in the process. Unfortunately, the commercial reality for many people, even at the indie scale, often is. It's unfortunate, and I hope to see that change in the years ahead. But at the very least, at this point, anybody who wants to be making video games can and should be able to fit making games into your life or into their life. That's it for now. Chris Stylen here of GameDev. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to playing your games in the future. Thanks.